Who do you think I should ask next? Because I think you have such a large network, lots of friends there, because you work so much in that community that I'm really looking forward to that answer.
There's a long list. Bevan Williams. Sure, the list goes on and on, but I will definitely make it a point for me to share those names with you, because I think there's a lot more that people should know about the awesome work that we're doing here in South Africa.
Yeah, I think that is definitely true, because for me, I know that the Scrum Alliance has been coming to Africa for a few years already. Today, I'm talking with Bevan Williams. We talked about living as a non-obvious person of color, collaborative versus competing in games and in work, about his experience of going for the first time to the big Agile Alliance conference in the US, how that blew him away and at the same time inspired him to become a conference speaker. I'm Yves Hanul from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of Agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button, because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it. Hello, everyone. And with me, hello, I have Bevan. Is that how I should pronounce your name?
Yes, that's correct. I always say it's like Kevin, but with a B instead.
Kevin with a B. I like that. And Kevin with a B is, and let me actually show where we are. So I'm trying to show this trick. So I'm asking Google where I am, and I am in Belgium. And when I click on here, I go to Cape Town, and by coincidence, today I just talked to Aslan as well, who's also in Cape Town. So I should say hi from him to you. Of course, when we'll air, this will take a little more time. It won't be in the same moment. And where is my mouse pointer? I want to bring you back on screen, of course. So voila, here you are. And Bevan, you told me earlier on, and so we're in the same time zone. So for me, it's just a few minutes after 8 o'clock, and I think it's the same thing for you.
Exactly the same, yeah.
And so just before we started talking, you told me about something in South Africa, the fact that you're on some blackout. Say us a little more about that, because I wanted to keep this for camera.
It's literally just come on. So I think you had it in mind, and our electricity provider decided to come to the party. Yeah, so we have limited capacity sometimes for the electricity for the country. So what they do is we call it load shedding. So essentially what they do is they roll blackouts depending on where you live, just in zones. So normally it's for about 2 hours at a time, maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Yeah, so that's why when I joined the call at 8, I was like still in the dark, going, well, we have no power.
Well, no power, but you have some kind of backup plan, and you have some way to connect, and because
you kind of had to. Yeah, we've been dealing with it on and off since about 2008, so this is pretty much the norm now. Yeah.
And interesting, because I know that people have been talking about it in Europe as well, on how to deal, and I had no idea what does that really mean. So for you, it means that you have some kind of backup, and you connect, because that's what we did before the electricity went on. So that's already showing us a little bit how we're living in different parts of the world, and that's one of the things I wanted to show people different. And we jumped right into it because I was so eager to hear that story. But well, tell me, or tell people who are here, a little bit about you. What do you want people to know about you? Who are you, basically?
Yeah. So I'm Bevan. I'm an Agile coach and trainer in South Africa. I started my career as a software developer. My first job was a waterfall. So I always hold onto that as a memory of what it could be like if I never ended up in Agile. I didn't enjoy it as a developer. Someone did all the thinking for me, and then I had to just enter it into a computer. It felt like factory work, which I've done in a previous life as well. I am.
You prefer to use your brain, basically.
I love using my brain, right? And I love it when people get to use their brain as well. So a big part of yeah, a big part of the driving force behind, where my career has taken me is about this idea of, work should be enjoyable. Like, we have smart, amazing, motivated people. And when I read the Agile Manifesto, quite a lot later than I care to admit sometimes, that was exactly what I had in mind. It was what I wanted from work, right? So, as a developer working in a team, as a Scrum Master, as a manager, and eventually moving towards coaching, because I thought, well, that's a new way that I could be effective. Same with training and speaking at events, etc.
Yeah, using our brain. How wonderful is that as an idea? Uh, that brings us, it's really, that tells a lot. I also like the fact that you mentioned that you are or you worked as a developer, and that you were used to that other way of working. Let's put it like that. And well, a lot of people now, if you look at youngsters coming into the world of programming, they don't really understand or don't know what that other world was. And it's good as a reminder that indeed sometimes there were people that said, I will be the thinker and you are just, well, basically the hands that need to do the typing, and that's it. And it was not a nice world. I've literally heard a manager, it was an architect, saying to someone, well, you fixed something in my code that I sent you. You were not supposed to fix it. I was like, wait a minute. You noticed that someone fixed the problem that was in there and you didn't like it. You should be happy that this person is helping you.
Yeah.
That's the kind of strange world that people were living in at that moment. Indeed, I kind of forgot about that we're not allowed to think at some, or at least in some organizations we were not allowed to think. Luckily, it wasn't everywhere. Okay, let's jump into that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but that has influenced you and who you are?
Yeah. Probably the number one thing is, so I realize there's a term for it. So as I get older, I learn new things. I love it. There's a term that I've seen online. People use it. They call it a non-obvious person of color. Growing up in South Africa, where race was always top of mind, it still is in many instances. I actually grew up as non-white, which means with the old system, I grew up in a non-white only area, which means I could only go to non-white only schools. And then eventually, like halfway through, like when I was still quite young, that switched. So, apartheid ended. Suddenly we could go to these mixed schools and we were kind of segregated even then, right? Because people weren't sure how to deal with this. And as I've grown up, because of, the way I speak, so I sound, very European in that regard. So I was quite fortunate with my schooling. People don't always know that when they first meet me. And it's interesting because it gives me a bit of a viewpoint, because people treat me quite well. I'm quite privileged, right? So I'm a male, and most people think I'm white, so they treat me quite well, but I'm not. So people tend to say things that you wouldn't normally say around a person of color, which gives me really deep insight into some of the maybe insecurities and maybe some of the concerns that people have. And that's pretty much driven a big part of who I am. It's always this finding my identity in this world that is so complex, but so quickly becoming mixed, with the whole worldwide digitization. And even the name of our race is offensive in some countries as well. So in South Africa, we're referred to as colored. Every time I go to the US, I have to be very mindful of prefacing that, because that's seen as a bit of a slur there as well. So it's just an interesting, diverse group to say that people are really different, and you never know what's going on with someone when you look at them the first time.
And yeah, because then like you say, you don't look black, so a lot of people might confuse you with being white, and if you then would use words like colored, people might feel offended because they say, what do you know about it? But like you say, if you're from a mixed race, then there's a lot of, so it feels like you have both the advantages, but also a lot of the disadvantages of both sides.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, which I believe it's given me insight. as I've matured in my age, I've learned that it is a positive thing to look at. It's an opportunity for empathy. It's an opportunity to understand what it might be like for someone that doesn't grow up in the same space as you, or with the same privileges or lack of privileges as you, which has been, it's been an amazing journey to get to that point, and looking forward to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, it's like you say, it brings opportunities because you can see it, you can use the advantages and then bring other people along with you, because some people might see you from a white side, and then indeed you can have more privileges, because whatever you look at it, we're all privileged one way or another. Like you just said, you're male, so you have already some advantage one way or another over females, but we have all kind of privileges in whatever multiple ways, and most people don't realize it. When we talk about privileges, all people like to say, but I have this and this and that. Yeah, but we all have a big list of privileges
Yes.
that are different, and it's good to realize that. And I think what I'm hearing in your story is that because you had these mixed experiences, you have a lot more empathy for seeing where you lack the privileges and where you have them, and to understand them. I think it took me a long time to realize some of my privileges, even if I always thought, okay, I care about women, I care about non-white people. I didn't always understand some of the privileges I had. And if you're living in such a mixed world, I can imagine that you realize this much earlier. And like you said, already when schools starting to mix, that's definitely. You were at what age at that moment that started?
So it was about 8 years old. So
Wow, that's a very young age. So to probably also to, well, what did I understand about the world at the age of 8? I probably didn't understand much.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a very core memory around that time. So the school that I went to, that that I was able to go through, was a convent, right? So it was like with nuns and very religious schools, but it was the only private type school that allowed non-white people. So at the time, mixing wasn't allowed, right? So if you were non-white, you went to non-white schools. If you were white, you went to white schools.
So
the
in
only
a
one
sense, these nuns were already advanced. Is that a way to look at the world, or from their point of view, or how should?
Quite possibly. I to be honest, I was too young to really pay attention, and I never really questioned it.
Yeah.
I just knew that that was again part of those privileges that we were able to do
Because
that,
I
right?
assume, well, I made the assumption these were white nuns, but maybe that's wrong. Is this?
So if from memory they were, and actually the memory that I have of that school was that it was very mixed, so it was allowed somehow. With the change in the laws, so at the end of apartheid, I remember, I think it was in 1995, I went to a public school for the first time, and there was this like core memory that always sits with me where, I at that point didn't realize there were different races. It wasn't something that really existed or in my mind, because at the previous school it was no one really minded. And I still remember we had to do roll call, where they called your name out, and then they did a bit of a census where they said, okay, if you're white, raise your hand. If you're colored, raise your hand. If you're Indian, raise your hand. And I remember I'd made a friend before school started, and they asked, who's white? And she put up a hand and says, who's colored? And I put my hand up, and she kind of looked at me a bit confused. And it got to break time, like the first break, and I went to hang out with her friends and the people I'd met in the morning, and they were like, whoa, hold on, you're colored. The colored kids have to hang out over there. And I remember being so confused about this, and like, it was just, that was the reality of it. It wasn't meant, maliciously. It was just, that was the way that it was. And it took quite a few years, and it probably will still take another few years before all of that is solved. But I think from an agility point of view, what that drove for me was this incredible sense of fairness. And it's something that, as I've moved more in towards leadership positions and realized the leadership capacity that I do have, was about that idea of fairness and teamwork. Like, if everyone's not coming along together, it's not a team, right? So we always look out for each other. So, all these, what might be seen as negative memories, actually have very positive outcomes. They form of who you are. Everyone goes through tough times, but like we said earlier, that's the privilege that comes through. Being able to learn and look back and reflect on that and survive that, I guess, is part of it.
Yeah, I like the way you bring it, and of course the fact that it's very interesting experience that you said. I grew up in a school where that was already mixed, and I had kind of no idea, or maybe you didn't pick up some of these messages that were sent in other parts of society, and then you go to school, and it was like, oh, wait a minute, you're not. Why are you talking to us? You're not supposed to, and but they were talking, that girl was talking to you before, so she didn't realize that she was not supposed to talk to you or not supposed to talk to her, so that kind of showed that it was irrelevant in a way.
Yeah.
But that's yeah, that I can imagine that it can lead a lot of memories, and it's a very interesting thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to move to that next part. Is that if you had not been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what you would have been doing?
Absolutely. I would have been a pilot. um, yeah, there was a very close point during my university career where I was not enjoying it as much as I should have been, to the point of going, I should join the Air Force, which in South
Wow.
Africa is not as prestigious as maybe in Europe and stuff, but there were fighter planes, right? So they did have some good jets, and I was like, that's a quick way for me to fast track getting someone else to pay for me becoming a pilot. Right?
Ah.
So yeah, so part of the like long-term
So
goal
the
was
army was just the vehicle in a sense, but the real desire was to become the pilot. That's what I'm hearing.
being a
Yeah.
pilot. Yeah, that was it. So the Air Force was the like, how can I afford? Because to getting a pilot's license in South Africa is very, very expensive.
I
You know,
think
relative.
everywhere around the world.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
probably
So
one of the most expensive. Well, it's probably compared to other countries, it's even, it feels more expensive, but it still is expensive everywhere, I think.
yeah. So
Uh,
I was like, how do you get to do that without paying for it yourself? Well, you get someone else to pay for it, and if it's 2 years of military service or Air Force service, obviously, I was in my very early 20s there, not thinking clearly, and trying to avoid exams. But I'm really glad that I went and did my exams, because now I can still do my pilot's license. I do it when I'm a little bit older and fund it myself, right? So use privilege to build more privilege, right?
Wow, that's and it would have been a completely different world, I would say, in a sense. But
Absolutely.
and so you were already thinking at that, what I say, did I hear correctly, at the age of 20 about, okay, how can I have someone else pay for my future, because you had a future in mind. But at the same time, you were realistic enough to know that at the age of 20 that, okay, this is not something I can pay for. So you already thinking about, how could I do it? And that's, well, this is probably, well, it's a plan of the army. Let's put it like that. They want to lure people into becoming to the army. So they just say, okay, we'll pay for your education, and then you have to stay. And depending on what country and what laws, you have to stay for another X years to pay back that same thing. So you think they're paying, but actually you're paying it with your time. You just don't realize it, and they
Yeah,
pay up front. They basically
exactly.
pay up front the money that you would earn somewhere else, in a way. But yeah, if you can do the work that you want to do, if it allows you to become a pilot, why not?
Yeah.
It's an interesting way of looking at it, I think, of course. It's and so what did in the end kept you from doing that?
Um, I can't say exactly. I think that, the biggest thing was just that, it was leaving university to go to that. I think it would have not gone down well with the family. It would not have gone down well. And
You were already in university at
yes,
that
yes, yes,
point.
yeah. I
You
was like, 2 or 3 years in already. So it was
okay?
that exams are getting busy. There's projects due. There's lots happening. So you're like, well, I'm just going to go and join the Air Force. That way, I can be a pilot and can fly jets. So it
So
wasn't a thought
there
out
was
idea.
already a dream, but it was also walking away from your duties at the time, in a sense, if you
Correct.
would have done that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine if you're 2, 3 years into university, that there's a lot of investment, both from your side as your family.
Correct.
I can definitely see that people would say, well, please first finish this part, and then you can dream on and you can go flying. But don't throw away the 3 years, because in a lot of cases you would have to start all over again next time if you want to do that. So that's I think I would let my children do whatever they do, but if they're close to the end or near to the end, I would also probably say, let's first finish what you started, and yeah, start
Yeah.
finishing, stop starting, something like that again.
Yeah, pretty much exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, well, and that kind of brings me to some other things that feel related. Is that what is your challenge or your biggest challenge for you right now, or what was a big challenge for you?
Well, I think you kind of touched the nail on the head with the previous at the end of the previous question, was that stop starting, start finishing.
Mm.
I am an incredibly curious person, and I love learning new things to a fault, because something new comes up and I'm like, oh yes, let me go learn that. Right? Someone
Oh,
releases a
there,
new.
an airplane, or there a bird, and up you're off, something like
There
that.
we go. There we go. So like someone releases a new book, I'm like, oh, I should go and buy that book. I'm like, never mind, the 30 other books that are in my backlog that I still need to get through. But it's already bought and it's in the list and it's ready to go. So I think it's probably something that, it's like on a personal level, that's the challenge that I deal with, is that see not so much seeing things through, but not being distracted too much by all the shiny, cool things that you can do. And I think it's taken me a long time to like realize that that's the challenge that I've got to do, to just be like, I've got time. Right. Sometimes, especially, when you're younger and you're starting off in an industry, you see people that have been doing it for 10, 15 years and you're like, I want that. And you forget about the 10, 15 years of the hard work that they put in to get to that point. So it was a lot easier to do it these days than it was, when I was younger. When I was younger, it was just, I must get that and go, go, go. And now it's actually a little bit like I have to actually experience the experience. I have to go through that to earn it. You can't just, get through it quickly. You can't read a book to get the experience. It's good to give you insights and stories, but yeah, that focus is, stop starting, start finishing.
I like that you mentioned, not it's not just reading the book, but then you have to start using the book and implementing and everything. So it actually makes it a lot harder for all the books that we read, all these stacks of books. It's not just like, okay, I read the book and now I can continue. No, now I need to see and think about, what did I learn, how can I use it, and where. But it's yeah, a friend of mine once told me that he's trying for at least one book a year. If he says, I'm select one book that I learned in that year, and I said, okay, I'm going to create a workshop with that book, because that's how I really learn it. And when you actually do a workshop and then you teach it, then you get all these questions that you didn't think about yourself, and that's when you actually start learning. And you think, oh, I'm teaching this workshop because I'm now so smart because I read a book. No, it's actually, the work is only starting about that time.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm hearing. It's just the finishing through the full work, and like you say, some of that takes a few years, some of that takes 10 years. We all yeah, I have a friend that goes to Olympics, for example, and a lot of people, when they think about sports people, they think about, oh, this is nice, and they have to focus for this, I don't know, 1 week or whatever, and when they go to the Olympics. No, it's since the last Olympics that I have been working, and maybe 10 years earlier, that they have been working and practicing and all over, and then getting up every morning, and that's a real job, is working on their sports and improving themselves. And in a sense, that's what we agile coaches do as well. We keep working, we keep learning. And yeah, so a lot of what we've learned as developers, as scrum masters, even managers, we are starting to reapply or learn as an agile coach. So it's not just the preparation for this workshop, it's the 10 years before that we've done. So I really like that. That's and so the second part of that question is why is that a good thing for you? So you've seen all these shiny things, and you know that you have to focus and stop finishing. But what part is good about that for you?
Yeah. So the strength that I found in that, to not, be overly self-critical of myself, but the strength that I found from that, the positive, is I tend to bring a broad insight to certain topics. So, I can choose which items I can go deep dive in, but I also know that I kind of know what else is out there. So, to use, a colleague of mine that I work with, he always says it is like, I just need to record you from, like, your brain is like, it's like an encyclopedia. So the strength that I've got from that is I tend to absorb a breadth of knowledge very quickly. So I tend to read the topics about it and then make those connections and say, well, I am now focusing on this. And while focusing on this, like maybe a book or a subject or a specific concept or a course or a workshop, and then the notes that I'll take is what else have I read or seen or referenced in the past that might have something to do with this, and kind of build a picture around that. So if recently a colleague on one of the community chats asked, what do we read for value stream mapping? And I was like, well, I've read the Learn to See book, but what else is there? I'm like, well, I know that, there's this web page, that web page, that web page. And then someone else recommends a book. And I was like, well, I haven't read that book. Let me add it to my list. So it's being able to see the bigger picture by being distracted by lots of things. So I think it helps that I'm able to remember all these shiny things that I look at.
Wow, that's important. It's not just you've seen it, but you also remember some of that stuff, and you have the kind of generalistic knowledge about it. So what I'm hearing is that you're too quick distracted to be in a sense to be a specialist very deep, but you have much more knowledge than most other people, so you can deep dive on something for a amount of time, and then you keep it. So what it reminds me of what Ken Beck told about paint dripping. So it's not just T-shaping, but it's paint dripping. So you have all these kind of paint drips a little bit everywhere from the different kind of things that you read or that you were distracted to, if to reuse that word. But you have that knowledge in your head. It stays in your head, and then when someone tries to pick your brain, all of a sudden there is a lot of paint coming out from different parts of your life that is related. So that is a big nice thing to bring.
Yeah, and it was one of those skills that waterfall environment did not enjoy as much, right? So, because they wanted you to be really good at just doing your thing.
You have to do the exact thing that we hired you. Don't think, don't use your brain where you have all that knowledge stored. We totally don't care. Bevan, you should do this little part. Don't get distracted by all these other kind of things. Do this thing. Yeah, I can definitely remember that. Imagine that this is not what the world that you were made for. It's definitely.
I remember when I was still, I was probably like 3 or 4 years into my software development career, and I remember working for a manager that actually introduced Scrum for my first time. It wasn't a good experience. It eventually became one, but it wasn't at the time. And I remember I had a performance review where they sit you down and they say, well, these are the things you've done well, and I was proud of myself. I did really well, and I was like, is there any feedback for what I can do to improve? And they were like, the CEO and I feel that you need to spend less time at work reading articles. So I was like, wait, what do you mean spend less time reading articles? So I was like, well, every time the CEO looks up from his desk, you're reading an article. And I was like, but how do you think I was able to do all the other positive things that you said? Is that that's how I learn? Is it that's how I detach from a problem and think of something else and learn different views of it? And I always thought that was funny because I was still in that transition from a very traditional waterfall command and control environment to this we can solve the problems in this more self-managed manner. And seeing a developer should not programming and typing in the computer, but actually reading an article or reading something else was quite a it was a fun story to think back on. Not at the time. At the time, I was a bit shocked.
Yeah, I can imagine. I have a friend that used to tell that if he wanted to think, he needed to go to the toilet in his company because thinking was not allowed. At the moment that his hands were not touching the keyboard, people were like, "What are you doing? You're taking a break or whatever." And he was like, I'm actually trying to solve this huge little problem. The big problem was that in the toilets he couldn't use a whiteboard, of course, so it was kind of difficult to visualize some of that work. But exactly the same thing as what you said. Thinking and learning, a lot of people didn't see that as part of development, where I think this is development. The typing is just it's just getting the ideas out of your head into a computer, but that's just a side effect. We need smarter thinking and better thinking, not faster typing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I hope that Agile has brought at least to a lot of people,
Yeah.
to realize that thank you for reminding us about that, because this is the second time you remind me about some of the things in the non-agile world, and I still see it from time to time. And definitely that part about thinking, I still see it in some companies, luckily less and less, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, it's still quite prevalent in South Africa. I think South Africa is rapidly catching up. Some of the first agile projects and people that have been working here, some of the shoulders of the giants that we've had to stand on. They were working in agile ways from 96. So you mentioned Aslam as well, right? So he's one of the originals, right? Working on it for decades. But that's still part of that early adopter phase, moving on to it, and it's still lots of companies are still working in a very waterfall way. It's still a very much acceptable way of managing projects in large organizations here. And that's why there's still, that's why we're so passionate in South Africa, because there's still so much of this work to do. We look overseas and we see what companies have gone through and where they are, and it gives us that inspiration to be like, we can get there too. We can get beyond that. And it's just, these kind of conversations and exactly this. It's things from outside of the agile world, more of the people side that kind of drives from a bit of passion there, right? So like,
it's interesting that you say, because we look and we're in the start of it. Last week I was at XP Day Benelux, and there was a friend of mine that talked about a conversation he had with Joshua Kariowski back in the US during summer. And Josh said that, well, actually, for a lot of all these people that have been doing this for 20 years, it feels like, okay, we've been there, and we've been going on for 20 years, but this is actually just the start of it. And if you just indeed look at how long we're doing programming, that's what, like 50, 60 years, if you exaggerate, depending a little bit. That's just the start of an industry, and Agile is already a larger part of that, but still not everything. But even then, it's just the start. I think if you look back at a lot of other industry, just building houses, we've been doing for 2,000 years. So if you compare IT to that, that's just a very small fraction. And I think, for us doing it 10, 20 years, it feels like this has been going on and taking a long time. No, this is just a start. And once Per told me that conversation with Joshua, I was like, yeah, this is true. It feels for a lot of people like, okay, 20 years, where do we go? Is there still a future for Agile? And so this is just the start. We need to recognize that. And your story about South Africa feels it's okay. Some other people like Aslan and others have done it for a longer while. I've been doing it in Belgium for a longer while, but a lot of companies are still new to that, and they still need to adapt and need to learn. And all of us, we still need to learn. Like you said, like Aslan said earlier today, there's still a lot that we all need to learn, and we sometimes forget that. It looks like that 10, 20 years is a long period, and in a lifetime, it's a lot. That's half of my. It's less than half of my life, because I'm 50 already. But it feels like half of my life. It's definitely most of my programming life. But if you look at it from a human point of view, it's just very barely scratched the surface, and there is still a lot there. And I hope to join you in what we'll see in the future. And like you say, you can do it in South Africa, following the examples of other companies in other parts of the world. But I think a lot of other companies still need to do a lot of work, even the so-called good names that we hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a really now I interjected a lot of it, but I really like your passion and the way you talk about some of these things. So I do wonder, do you know for you what drives you?
I mean, there's a few things, right? I mean, there's the good answer, right? The good answer is and it is true, but it's that because of the strong value in terms of teamwork and fairness, like, I truly believe that people can enjoy their workplace. So having been in a place where I didn't enjoy it, where I was really passionate about the job, so being a programmer, but I hated the environment in which I was working, I wanted to fix that. And I was like, I don't think people should feel that. And I've seen that when people experience this, I can bring my full self to work, I can feel included, I can actually bring my full brain and my thinking and my experience, and we can actually build something amazing for someone. I've seen how that changes people's lives. And they, years later speak to colleagues that I've worked with, and they're still saying, well, that was still such a great team to work on, and that was still such a great product to work on, such a great problem to solve. And that's kind of the thing that continues driving me going forward. There's always going to be a bit of a personal element as well, right? So, I mean, I have personal growth. I'm very goal oriented. I do want to achieve something. So there's a part of me that never wants to be the face of it, but at the same time, I also really believe that I can bring others up with me. So a big part of driving me is I've got to improve myself, because by improving myself, I can help others do it too. So that's what drives my learning. It's something that drives, self-awareness, always learning, and realizing that there is no, kind of what we were just saying, right? There is no done. Same with Agile, there is no done. As long as someone's using it, as long as someone's thinking about it, there's improvement to be made. So a big part of that, there's always going to be a personal. I wish I was the type of person that was completely selfless, but that is a big part of what drives me as well.
I find it interesting that you kind of, it almost sounds like it's negative that you want to work on yourself. And I do understand there is that ego part where, okay, I do it for because I can help and you see how good I am. But at the same time, you're helping others. You could also say, okay, I want to learn because I want to become the best, and then forget about everybody else because now I am the best agile coach, or whatever that means. But you bring it with a passion to also help others learn. Which makes sense, of course, for a role like an agile coach, because it wouldn't make any sense to just become the best in helping others without helping others. That's kind of not possible. But yeah, that's definitely is. There is that duality, I think. Yeah, it's well, I find it interesting as a conversation because. Agile coaches somehow, it is for me also an ego thing. We like to think, okay, we just do it selflessly for others, but there is a part of us that thinks, hey, I'm the best to help you, and it might not be I'm the best in this, but I'm. It's more like, okay, I think I'm capable of helping you one way or another, and having you figuring it out. So it doesn't automatically mean that I think that I'm the smartest, but there is definitely a part of me that thinks, okay, there is something in me that can help you bring along. That brings a lot of interesting conversations there, especially once we start talking about training people. If we're talking at conferences, there is a part that most of it, not all of us, but most of it, do it also because we want some kind of recognition for being on stage, and it feels nice, and it feels nice to get an applause. Not always. Sometimes we do it because we learn more, and I definitely feel both parts of it. But the applause is nice as well. Let's just face it. It's nice to get the applause, and it's nice to have people tell you like, okay, you did a nice job here, and you helped me. So there is that ego part in there with that drive. Thank you for being that open and honest, because not everybody realizes themselves. And again, it does not mean because other people don't talk about it that they also have it. That's not the case. But there is definitely people who do have it, but who don't want to be transparent about that part. So it's very nice to talk about that.
Yeah, I've been quite fortunate to work with people at work and in the communities, and leaders that I've resonated the most with are the ones that are open about their intentions as well as their states. And it's taken some practice, and again, there's still a long learning journey, not done yet, right? It's very much that, right? So I resonate very well with leaders who are very open about their intentions, and say, this is very much for my ego, but this is why I wanted to go forward. And it made me reflect quite a lot to think about that, to say, well, what is my ego telling me? Am I doing this purely for like a beneficence point of view, for helping others, or is there a bit of ego involved? And it's normally a bit of both. All right. So there's almost like a tagline I was trying to think of, was like I want to win, but I don't want to win by myself. Right. And if I don't win, but everyone else does, then that in my mind is a win, right? So I'm not the most competitive person in that regard, but winning for me is very much a team sport. It's very much we win together.
So it's a corporate what Alistair Coburn is always talking about. It's we have the competing part and we have the collaborating part and the cooperative part. So it's what you're talking about. Okay, we want to win, but doing it together. From that, I kind of assume that if you would play sports, that the individual sports is less attractive to you than the team sports. Is that a good assumption, or?
That's a good assumption, though it is always interesting. The sport that I did at school was, or that I did really well at school was track. So I did high jump. But the reason I liked that was because it is an individual sport, but like, again, not very competitive. I wasn't an amazing sportsman, but I love to just sit and think. And if you ever watch the high jump, it can last for quite a long time, right? You ended up sitting around there waiting for one person to jump, and it was quite nice. But I enjoyed playing, team-based sports a lot more. I enjoy watching team-based sports a lot more as well. And I find I do tend to resonate there with team-based sports a lot more.
Yeah, I like that discussion, because when I look in my high school, I was actually playing mostly table tennis, which is a single sport. And when I reflect on it, a lot of it has to do that. I like the team sport, but because I was not good at many of these things, I was not allowed to be in the team. And so then of course the only thing that's left is doing sports where you're on your own and you can compete, and then you can do that. But again, I didn't like the competing part. I like to, if I look back, I like to practice, and I went to practice a lot, but I didn't like to do the competition. And somehow they learn you always into like, okay, you can practice, but then you have to play, and that's how you become better. And I like to become better comparing myself to the day before or the year before, but I didn't like the competing part. And so that's, it's interesting to think back about a lot of that and the dynamics that play at school and everything there. So it's
that is an interesting thought. I wonder how many other agile coaches have very similar stories, because I feel the same as I didn't enjoy the competitions as much. I like the social element of the competitions, right? Because normally you would go on a trip, and but the actual competing was not.
Exactly. That's the kind of thing. Well, if people recognize this, please, I'm being told I should say that much more. So where is it? Somewhere here in the comments. Put on other things if you have similar kind of experience with competition or with non-competition and with sports, and how that worked for you as an agile coach or as someone who's interested in these things. Let's move to that next one. And what do you consider your biggest achievements?
That's a tough one. Biggest means there's one, and that's hard.
Well, you can give a 10 achievements, the things that we're talking about ego before. What are you proud of? Basically, that's the kind of thing.
I think probably the one that came to mind from a career perspective, from an agile coaching perspective, was speaking at Agile 2019. So I mentioned earlier about finding ways of achieving goals, right? And I wouldn't say getting someone else to pay for it, but in a sense, right? So, growing up, in the way that we did, I didn't travel overseas at all. So it was always a thing. So I always find ways to get overseas through work or through something else. And I remember at the company at the time that I'd been working for quite a long time, I eventually managed to convince the CIO to let me go to Agile 2017 in Orlando. And I mean, that was mind blowing. Like, to see a hotel of that size, it was the first time to the United States. It was massive. Everything was so big. Everyone talks about the US and how big it was. And And there were like 2,000 people at a conference. That was mind blowing for me. I don't think we have a venue in South Africa that can take that. Okay, well, I guess we do, but like it was that big. It was a very big thing
But
for me.
the venues are then more sports venues and stuff like that. Probably a hotel where you can do these kind of events. Maybe not. I don't know.
I don't even think so. So, I mean, when we organize conferences in South Africa, we're looking at about 300-400 people venue sizes, and this was like 2,000. And I remember at this conference, I remember watching the keynote speaker at the time was L Marquet, and I remember watching
From Turn the Ship Around. Yeah, that's from
yeah.
exactly.
And I said, I want to do that. I want to speak at this conference. I want to speak at this conference. And it took a few years. I started reviewing papers. I started finding ways of helping out. I was fortunate enough to go to Agile 2018 as well. And then at Agile 2019, I submitted an experience report on self-selection that we've been running at this company. And it was distributed remote. And it was an opportunity to speak at, the largest Agile conference. And that was an achievement for me. That was I set my goal, I achieved it, I worked hard towards it, and I got it. And I spoke at Agile 2021, and I've now, in that same year, 2019, I ended up speaking at 3 other international venues. So I set out for one specific achievement, and that was the one that kind of drove me towards all the others as well. Yeah.
That sounds like a nice achievement, because you lock on to one thing, and there are some, it's interesting. I was about to say there's some downfall or something, but that sounds negative. Where actually for you, it's more the positive part. Is that because there's some other things that follow that, and then you basically said, okay, I tick these boxes as well, and I take it on top of that. Did you speak at other conferences before you spoke at Agile 2019 or not?
Yeah, so I spoke at a few, so the regional Scrum gathering locally. So I left Agile 2017. I arrived back in South Africa, and there were 2 call for papers open at the time for conferences in South Africa, and I submitted to them both, and I got accepted to both. I was like, okay, I didn't expect to get. Now I have to learn to speak in front of people.
And now I have to do it.
I contacted, so at the time I was attending quite a few of the local meetups. I offered to speak there. There was a small practice, like a Scrum Master, like meetup, very small, like 30-40 people. I practiced there. And then I just started applying, and I was like, well, if this is the goal, I've just got to, put myself out there. I've got to do these applications and see what hits. And I got quite fortunate that most of them submitted. So something I wanted to say resonated with people, which felt quite nice. Yeah, and the thing is that it's kind of like a slingshot. So it's the biggest achievement so far, but it's it's slingshotted me. So as going through that journey, I started looking at more goals. So like speaking at a conference, and then what, and then what. So I mean, there's lofty goals like one day I'd love to be a keynote speaker. How important is that goal right now? Probably not the most important. So I've got a second kid on the way. So that's just from personal life achievement, I'm still alive. That's great. Still standing. The kid's still surviving.
I was about to say, especially, I don't want to put a dumper on the emotions and everything, but I always say, one of the things I say is that a lot of people go for what I would say one kid too much. And it's not like we don't love these children, but it's like, for some people it's from 0 to 1, for others it's from 1 to 2, from others it's like 16 to 17, whatever. But there's a moment that you say, I can still handle it, you can just one more kid, what's the problem? And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, how do we do this? It's like,
is that like the with kids, like you always have one more kid than what you prepared for, kind of thing?
Yeah, so something like that. It feels like and again, I love my children. It's been a wonderful experience, but you sometimes don't always realize what that brings as things that you need to do, and even if the children don't have any challenges. They always bring in some attention that you want to do, because that is part of what parenting is, of course. But then it can become really challenging, because most of us, we get very young children at the moment that we have lots of ambition, a little bit like what you say, you have this and you want to do this and that, and then it's like, oh, but I shouldn't forget that there is another project that I've been that I have been working on with my partner, and that that's along the way, and it's it can be challenging from time to time. So, but the other hand is, what I've learned as a parent is that I became a much better, well, in a sense, project manager is maybe the wrong word, but I've better learned to organize my time and to realize that, oh, if I want to do this, and if I want to do if I want to do this, the child of being the parent, and if I want to do work life, so I need to become better at that, organizing my time, and finding ways, if I can do it, finding other people that can help me in different parts of the life. So that that definitely is there. So I'm definitely, I didn't want to say it's impossible, of course not. It's just that you need to become better at other stuff if you want to keep doing all the other things.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've noticed that if I think of the last year of conferences, so I was in Denver for Scrum Gathering, and most of the conversations I had was actually with parents, so like yourself. And I think it's part of that, semi-conscious exploration of stories. So how were others able to do it? How are other people tried different things? What happened? And it's almost like a way for me to normalize that exact thing that you mentioned, right? Is that you've got to kind of balance that ambition. And that's kind of part of that idea of that, we're never done, right? So at this stage of life, the focus, the priorities are more family-wise. But it doesn't mean that those don't shift, just like they've shifted now towards children. They may not shift, or they'll shift back into other things as well. So as life evolves and kids grow older and have different needs, who knows what the future holds, right?
Yeah, that's it's impossible to. Well, for me, I find personally, for example, I don't believe in work-life balance. I don't think there is a balance. For me, it's much more like, how can we integrate it? And so some conferences like ALE in Europe brings or invites the family with children, so you can actually do children become part of the program. They follow things, they do keynotes and stuff like that. So there's a real integration. But on the other hand, the time is there, and I mean, the moment that I'm talking to you, I am not with my family. And so at that point, there is definitely a limit in the number of hours that there is in a day. And so we need to look at that, and some of these things we can integrate. Like I brought in multiple occasions, I brought my children with me on stage, so then we can have such a thing together. But there's other parts in life. Well, I can go to their schools to do something. I know I did something on internet security at the school, so that gives me a way in seeing how their teacher is behaving and how the school is. But that's limited. So a lot of other things is really being completely independent on time, and then we need to figure it out.
That's good advice.
And I want to move to that next question about personal agility. Is there anything, a tip on that you want to share with us?
I think this conversation we had before this led straight to this question. It's to be completely honest about your capacity. So not with anyone else, but with yourself. And I think it's kind of the conversations that we have with teams as well, is to say, yes, you can tell someone that you can do all of this work. You're not going to, right? So be very, very honest with how much you're able to do, because that's going to lead to the conversation to say, well, if I can only do this amount of work, I should only prepare to do that amount of work. Like if that's the amount of effort or capacity or energy I have left available, that's how I can respond to the change. If you're not honest with yourself about that, then you're just going to overcommit.
It's interesting that you say, because if you know that this is your capacity and you commit to this, then it's impossible. But even if this is your capacity, I think you would better much say, I commit to this, because there will be more things coming in. And just like you say, all teams, we overcommit and then we feel cramped. And I hear so many managers saying, oh, we need to pressure the team because they don't want to do it. It's like, no, all people, like you say, most people, they already overcommit at personal level. So at team level, that just extrapolates, and then at company level and whatever. And it's such a good example if we as agile coaches can already say, wait a minute, that is my capacity. Let's not do that for so. And preferable, like I said, maybe a little bit smaller. But if I'm already stating the right amount of capacity, just 100%, that is already so much better than most people can do.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's hard. It's really hard for all of
Oh,
us.
yeah.
It's you're just realizing it for yourself. I'm not. You talk already about talking it with other people, but I'm like, if I realize it already, what is my capacity? That's already really helpful. Just today, well, I said I had the conversation with Aslam, but there was a third conversation coming in that I would do half an hour after this conversation that was planned. It's like, and at first I was like, oh, that's good. Then in one evening, I got 3 interviews done, and then I'm like, wait a minute. I won't have any energy left after this conversation, so I'm just not going to do it. And if I have energy left, well, maybe I should spend that energy with my partner and with my family, and not just trying to cramp in 3 things in one evening. It looks very efficient, but it won't be effective at all. So it's a great tip. Thank you for reminding all of us that is important. If just half of the people listening to this are already implementing this, I think we have already a much better world there. So
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
that
that's
principle, that agile principle of sustainable pace, right, is something that always sticks with me. I was like, can you maintain this indefinitely? Most likely not, right? And I think a lot of us, like the example you gave with teams, it's exactly that. So I'm quite fortunate that the team of coaches that we're working with at the moment, we spoke about this when we formed. We said, we need to model sustainable pace. We're working in a corporate environment which, has a bit of a culture of, filling up meetings, right? So, and filling up. Yeah, I called it. What did I call it the other day? I called it it's calendar Tetris, right? So it's like you kind of fill in the blocks of like, how can you map it all out? And we said, well, if anyone's going to show that it's okay to not do this, we have to hold that space. And we've got to be very clear and say, like, this is blocked out, or this is time for family. And it's more of that. If us as agile coaches can't model that behavior, then no one's going to do it, right? Otherwise it's just something we say.
I like that word. I should remember the word. I've heard it before, but I kept forgetting it. Calendar Tetris is definitely something that we need to talk. And well, for me, that's one of the things I saw in the pandemic when everybody moved around, is that before the limit of meetings was that natural boundary of the number of meeting rooms, and now the meeting rooms have gone. So the normal boundary is basically the time of the people, and then the calendar is full. Then, oh, can you work half an hour earlier and half an hour later and whatever, because otherwise we can't fill in my schedule, or we can't. Wait a minute, maybe we're trying to do too much. So that's the kind of thing. And it kind of brings me automatically to that other tip or other question: what have you learned from working remotely?
So I've been pretty fortunate. My entire working career has had some element of remote in it, at varying degrees. So even my first job, the waterfall one, when we had to do deployments, we actually worked with teams in Uganda and Kenya. So we always had some elements of remote work. And back then the internet was not what it is right now. So it provided its own challenges. But as a coach, most of my career was actually in remote teams. So we had teams in Taiwan, Ukraine, South Africa, and also dispersed within South Africa as well. The thing I've learned the most about it is that you cannot treat it like working in person. It is a completely separate thing. You have to look at it like it's a completely blank sheet, something completely new, and apply lessons to that. I wrote an article many years ago trying to summarize a paper by Agile about the things that impact remote communication or distributed communication. And it was specifically in software teams, but it was looking at what are the different types of distances that exist. So it's, things like socioeconomic distance, geographic distance, temporal distance. So, we're quite fortunate we're on the same time zone, but, when you're working with teams in different time zones, none of those considerations, or very little of those considerations, come into play in person. And we expect the same thing, the same level and quality of communication remotely. And I think we need to see it as what it is, which is a completely different thing. And if people treat that as a different thing, it allows us to build the foundation of what makes good or high value communication in remote working. And I think there's been so much.
And to use these differences, because indeed, when we meet face to face, we're in the same time zone, we're in the same space, everything is the same. I've worked with people in Yekaterinburg, which was a 4-hour time zone difference, so they started 4 hours earlier. And that has some advantages, because in the evening we can send them some work, or we can have some saying, okay, could you check this out? And by the time I get to work, they've kind of figured it out, and then we have some 4 hours that we can work together, and then we can work a little bit on our own. So there's differences, but we need to work and figure it out, because it is totally different. I like that you bring this up, because I like that you bring it also up, that we need to learn to work with that, because basically if we kind of working, how should I say it? Working in the office, we've kind of figured it out, but we all think that it's natural. No, it's not natural. We figured it out the last 50 years. I still remember when the first time I went to the office, I learned from working in that first company. As a student, that's totally different than when you start to work. And then you realize, okay, talking and learning about people is also during the break at the coffee machine and all this kind of thing. And if I want to learn about someone else at a different part of the company, maybe I should take a coffee there, and I have to figure stuff out. And gradually we learn a lot of these tricks. And now remote, most of us haven't figured it out. And so there's no guidelines, or not enough. And so few of us like you have been working and doing it longer. So you have some more experience on some of these things. So that's really nice.
Yeah, I remember it's probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, the company I was working at. So I just moved into, I think at the time I was a development manager, and we were trying to make a case for having team members work sometimes remotely. And it was so interesting, because a lot of those conversations that we were having then, we had time to have those conversations, right? So we had that luxury of, no employee's deadline. And it was interesting, because all those conversations that we were having 8 years ago was exactly the conversations that happened with COVID, right? So suddenly it's like, how is this possible? How do we know people are working? How do we mentor people that are new, right? It's exactly like you're saying. They don't have the luxury of just tapping someone and asking them. They're brand new to the company. There's this, 15-year senior, and they've got to reach out to them on Teams. No ways they're going to do that, right? So
if somebody is in the office and has no clue, basically you kind of see it after half an hour, or you pass by and you see them wandering around, and you can ask, okay, dear Peter, whatever your name, I think you kind of lost. Can I help you? Well, you use different words, but basically that's what it means. If people working on their own and at home, it's also hard to ask them, are you lost? Or, no, I'm lost. I'm working. Okay, maybe not. And so, it's definitely, we need to figure a lot of that stuff out.
Yeah, so and I think, what we learned 8 years ago, which was so ironic, was that you just have to do it. You can't think your way through all of the potential problems that come up, right? So that was that agile kind of thing. You have to learn by doing. It's a complex problem. You can't foresee what all issues might come up. You might foresee some of them, but the requirements are unclear, the technology is unclear. Let's do it and see. And I think a beautiful thing that came out of everyone having to work from home was that they can see that they've done it now, and they're realizing, wait a minute, things didn't really fall apart, right? So looking only at that element of 2020, 2021 was, it is possible. And if it wasn't possible, what made it so? And were we able to solve that and pick that up? And I think a lot more companies realized they were a lot more agile than they thought they were, right? It wasn't. wasn't doing these things. I was like, wait a minute, when things need to change, we can change. Oh, wait a minute, we didn't know we could do that, right? So
Exactly, and I think indeed COVID brought a lot more agile transition than agile transitions were before. It's like people had to change one day from the other, and they were able to do that in non-agile ways, in the sense that they worked remotely. So remote learning more about agile than the agile people telling them that they had to work face to face together. In a sense, that's the kind of nice way of looking at that.
yeah,
Um, Okay, you already talked a little bit about books and other things. So, what's a book that you want to talk about?
So probably my favorite book that I've read in the last few years is that How Emotions Are Made by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
That's the one, I think, the one on the right. Huh?
That's the one on the right. Yeah, it's she is a exceptionally accomplished neuroscientist. So it was a bit of a heavy read. I'm no neuroscientist myself. I love scientific articles, but it was quite a heavy read. But I found it, I want to say it was transformational for me. There were things that I could never fill in the gaps through from my own past reading. And that book kind of filled in a lot of those gaps, a lot about the way that we interact as people and teams. That we see as, oh, well, that's just genetics. That's just the way that we are. There's nothing we can do to change that, really. You can cope with it, and that's it. And a lot of that book challenges that thinking. And I love that. I love books that challenge thinking. So that's a little bit of the rebellious streak. But then I also love the fact that it was based on a lot of research. And then she took that research and says, look, this is what it is right now, and this is what it could mean in the future. And even just that, being able to think and apply that knowledge almost immediately through her eyes was quite amazing. I did end up buying that second book that you put up on screen, the 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. So she calls it, it's the world's first coffee table neuroscience book. And it really is that digestible. So a lot of the deeper concept that she dives into, she kind of covers at a very high level, with some really good metaphors and stories and examples from her, her as a parent as well, that she's seen in her child. And it's I really enjoyed it.
I really like. I read the first one, the book on the right, not the table version. Let's put it like that. For me, it also brought, like you say, she gave a lot of data on research, for example, also on body language. There's a lot of people that I've been saying for a lot of years that people overestimate how good they are in reading body language. And she explains it. And she's like, I cannot, like you say, it's a very hard read. So I read it, I understand it, but I don't understand it enough so I can repeat it to people. But I basically tell people, look, you just overestimate what you do with body language. If you want to know more, read this book, because it will tell you much more. It talks a lot about culture and how people misunderstand their own culture and the problems that come with, especially around body language and culture, that we think we're all the same, and that we but the short version for me is like, we understand body language because we all grew up more or less in the same culture, and then once we go to work, we work with people who grew up in different cultures, and we still think we can read body language, and it's just not true. And there is tons of examples, lots of research in that book, and I'm just picking up one little part because it's the most striking thing. I totally was not surprised, because that's how it felt already for a long time, because I could never prove it, and lots of people threw research at me that I was wrong, and she basically done the research on the research, and it shows that, okay, this is why people misunderstand that research and that. So it's like, wow, that was meta research that she done in that book, and it is indeed wonderful. And it's a hard read. It's not a book that you will read in an afternoon and that will grab. It took me a long time reading it, listening to it, because I did both on that book. It took me much longer than usually, but it's such a wonderful read. So it's
I feel like the part that stuck with me is I've actually ended up doing quite a few talks. And you mentioned earlier the friend of yours that tries to turn it into a workshop, and it's exactly that. How can I bring some of what I've learned into training and into workshops and activities and teams themselves? And it was very much that. And I think the two big themes that came out was that, like, when something's happening in a team, you can't just assume what someone's thinking, what they're feeling. And there's a big part, it's almost, I want to say it's a misunderstanding or a misapplication of emotional intelligence, where people say, oh, I'm emotionally intelligent, I'm an empath, I know exactly what you're feeling. And I think this book was, and again, like you as well, I felt uncomfortable with that. I was like, but you don't know what I'm feeling. You're telling me what you think I'm feeling, but it's not what I'm feeling. And that's very hard to explain. And this kind of gives such a good way of doing it. And there were some fun exercises that you can do in the way she brought in that book with the pictures of how our brains just fill in this information. And at that time that I started reading that book, so I've been on my, CST journey is one of those goals, right? So working towards. And I was quite fortunate during the lockdown period where everything kind of shifted remote. Suddenly in South Africa, not being able to travel around the world and do code trainings, I could do it remotely. So within the space of 2 months, I trained all across the globe. So you've got people from Asia, you've got people from India, you've got people from Europe, you've got people from the US, South America, and all of those different cultures, and having to see the effects of this book there as well, and realize the facial reactions that you're getting, the responses to your jokes, or maybe they're just bad jokes.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's just, I love it. And this book was just because I love different cultures. I love different people. And I think there's a lot of good science in this book that supports a lot of the diversity and inclusion work as well, to show how diverse people are, that, actually, even the people that you think look and sound and speak like you are completely different to you. There are so many aspects and underlying points of diversity that, you have to be curious, right? So, and then it's, again, in my head, it's all linking to, Dr. Caitlin Walker, like all of those kind of works of like being curious and just wanting to listen.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the diversity part of it, but it's definitely the book makes a big point for it to that you actually need it, because it shows how people are different, that we misunderstand each other, and this is why having a diverse team and having a group of diverse people can actually show you about some of the misunderstandings that you have. Because if you have just a limited group of people, we'll all think the same, and we'll all select the same, and then we'll all think the same thing, and then why have multiple people on the team? Then you can just have one person if you all think the same. Basically, that doesn't bring any value. So it's much better. Okay, thank you very much. You wanted to talk about another book, if I remember correctly. Or did I?
Well, I mean, there's one that popped into my head that actually connects very well with the How Emotions Are Made as well. It was also another connection that I'd made and worked on to speak and talk about. It was this idea of empathy as well. So Paul Bloom has that book, Against Empathy. And, having read that before How Emotions Are Made, I was like, some of it, I kind of challenged it in my head, and it made a lot of sense. And How Emotions Are Made just kind of filled in those gaps a lot, because it's very much against this whole idea of you cannot guess what someone else is thinking. The only way to fill up those gaps is through conversation. And in actual fact, if you're coming from a point of compassion, then it shouldn't matter what the other person is thinking if you want to really truly help them. And I think that's the point that you're making with diversity and inclusion. I think like all of those kind of things play in the non-agile stuff that helps agility as well.
Yeah, I really like that, because indeed, like you said, with conversations, people actually have to say it, and it's a typical kind of joke between male and female that then people say, well, you have to know, as a partner, you have to know me and you have to know what I'm thinking. Like, no, we've been there. The research shows that it doesn't help us. I was in a training, where was I don't remember anymore where, but I was in a meeting somewhere in the last week, and somebody was asking, okay, this and that, and so in the end someone said, well, don't you just want us guessing? Just tell us what you want us to learn, because it's a guessing game, and it's not fun for neither of us. It's not fun for you because we keep getting it wrong, and you get frustrated. It's frustrating for us because we're 20 here and we all keep guessing different kind of stuff. It's like, tell us, and then we can have a conversation why we agree or disagree. That's the kind of thing. And if you bring it in a different way, if we can bring up multiple topics we can discuss, but this was clearly like, this is a person having one ID, and we, the 20 people that were in the room, we had to guess until that person says, yes, now you're right. Well, I don't like these thinking games. That really usually doesn't help much. It's wants to show how smart we are, and usually we end up all thinking that we're not smart at all.
That's
So
exactly
it's
it.
okay. I want to go to that next question. Is that what question should I ask you, and what's the answer?
Oh, this is the hardest question that you've asked me so far.
Yes, I know.
What question should you ask me? Well, I guess probably the question I get asked the most, and it's the one that I think I enjoy answering because I don't have a perfect answer for it, but I always have an answer for it, which is the how do people get started in Agile? And I love that question because it's that intent to start, and I think that's kind of an inspiration, is that you don't have to be where Elissa Atkins is, or Ivan Oel is, or Bevan is, or anyone else. You can just start. And I guess the answer that I always give to that is exactly that: is to just start. It's to say, here's the Agile Manifesto. What does that mean to you? Pick a behavior and say, like, what are you doing? What are you not doing? Like, what have you tried in the past? What sounds like this is this guideline for you? And then just try and make one little change. And then every time you do something, look back and think, did this help me become more or less along these values and principles? And it's advice that I, even when you do something like a very specific framework training, like a Scrum, and they say, how do I become a Scrum Master? And you say, well, whatever job you're in right now, apply what you've learned from Scrum, or apply what you've learned from XP, or apply what you've learned from Kanban, and see where it takes you. And I've seen amazing things of people that have come from completely non-technical, you wouldn't even think Agile would be in that space. And they've kind of brought in this idea of iterations, and they said, well, this part of Scrum didn't work, but actually the value of what we're getting out of it, so like, getting this constant feedback cycles, we did it in a different way. We don't have fully cross-functional teams, but this is how we collaborated instead. And it's like those kind of things. I'm like, that's how we become more agile. It's just starting. So yeah, I guess that's probably my favorite question to answer people. And I guess the more beers that are involved, the longer I can go on and speak about it.
Yeah, I like that, because indeed you bring up a lot of interesting parts there. Is that there is that certain practice that we do, or that principle, but actually no. Well, what I want to say is more like the thing is that we do a certain practice, but there is a principle behind it. And okay, how can we, if we cannot apply that practice, how can we still find that principle? And okay, if we want face to face, it's actually about having good communication in a trusted way, and that's the easiest way to do it face to face. Okay, we move remote. How do we bring again trust in that communication so that we can apply the different kind of things? And it turns out it's by asking what we want, and yeah, stating what we want, but also asking a lot of questions. And do we understand each other? And it takes longer. It's harder in multiple different kind of ways, but it is possible. And when it goes wrong, we need to figure out in different kind of ways, how can we restore trust? And that's completely different than physically, but it still is possible. And we need to deal with that. And I really like that, because you brought it not just into the remote world, but you also say, okay, we can do this in non-traditional, non-IT worlds. And yeah, definitely. I think a lot of the agile principles and the ideas, they can go, maybe not everywhere, but in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So it's,
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it's the thought, it's an attitude, it's that thinking, right? It's that approach to how we do our work, and how we deliver value, and why we're doing what we're doing. And I believe anyone can start that. And again, whether it's ending up at a specific picture or way of doing things, I have no control over that. But if they can start and they can answer that question for themselves, that for me is like a winning outcome.
Yeah, I like it's interesting that a lot of us we keep saying about its mindset and everything, but you also say you need to start. And I've been thinking a lot the last year. For me, I've been yeah for years I've been saying it's the mindset and whatever. But when I look at how I started, I actually learned most of Agile by habits. It's by
That's
getting
right.
started. It's by doing small steps, and so there's a lot of habits there, and
Mm.
habits will be different for a sporter than for a programmer, but they're still habits. So we need to find out, okay, how can we get more feedback? Okay, if I am a sporter and I want feedback, then maybe I need to do competitions and I need to do it. Or at training, I need to train against a friend or against someone else, and or train against myself. Oh, maybe I can just look at my timings and whatever
Yeah.
and record that, and then the next day I compared it, and I know if I'm going forward or backwards or whatever. It's that feedback that I'm looking for. So that's the habits and learning from that.
Yeah.
That yeah, kind of like that. I want to move to that last question about who do you think I should invite next?
Yeah. So yeah, there's two people that come to mind. So the one is just she was a colleague of mine on Sagza. We collaborated with the who's Agile book in South Africa as well. So Suela, I think I've sent you her details as well.
I think
Um,
that's her. Is this correct?
yeah, yeah, that's correct. So she's no longer in South Africa, but she's busy starting up a new Agile community. I always get confused with the countries. I think it was Tanzania. But yeah, she's a lovely human being. It's one of those people that just embodies that openness, the openness element and continuous learning element of that comes with agility. And it's something that I've always respected in her. And I've always learned from her. Again, just her presence and her calming attitude. And I think the only sad thing is we never actually got a chance to work together yet. So who knows where the
Well,
future may.
you collaborated on the book in a sense, so but that's
Right.
I agree. It's
Yeah.
it's not the same thing as working, but it's kind of it's already a little part of
And
collaborating.
we were on the Sagza community together, right? So we
Yeah,
we
so
organized the conference together, and that's always a fun time as well. And the other person I'd recommend as well that I think to speak to is Melena Jacobsen. So I'm
and
very
that
fortunate.
should be her picture. Is that
Spot on.
correct?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm quite fortunate because I do actually work with her now. So she's one of the leaders I mentioned earlier as well. So um, she always says like I'm very honest. And she is. She's incredibly honest, very straightforward. You always know where you stand with her. But part of it is that she's also just the newest certified Scrum trainer in South Africa and actually in Africa. So for me, that's on my journey towards becoming a certified Scrum trainer. She played a big part in that journey as well, because I kind of saw her when she was beginning that journey and saw how much time and effort and all of that she put in, and the dedication she's put towards her working in the Agile community and in companies as well. And it's I think it's worth having a conversation with her as well.
Thank you for inviting her because indeed, well, it kind of brings back the whole or cycles back the whole story to the beginning when we were talking about habits and about doing small little steps and learning, and that's basically what you say is what she's been doing. Okay, she achieved it, but she worked really hard for it a long time, and we talked about how some things take a long time. It's not just, well, people see the end result now, but they don't know how long people have been working on. And what you're saying is that
Exactly.
you've seen this from a close distance when she started, and you learned and you saw. So that is an inspiration, at least for you. That's what I'm hearing, and I assume it's an inspiration for other people as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting her. That's well, what I said to Aslam as well. I'm always interested in. For me, there's three kind of people that I want to invite here. And the
Yeah.
first one is the people that I've met before that I haven't seen in, well, at least not in 3 years, but most of them I haven't seen in 5 years or longer. Then there's the
Yeah.
people like you that I've met already before in a digital way, but we haven't really talked and spent so long together. So for me, that's a better way of connecting. And then the third one is like, for in this case, is learning some new people and getting connected and learning about, because yeah, I'm still amazed every time I hear stories from new people. It's like, yeah, I probably should know this person, but for whatever reason, there still is a few billion people in the world that I haven't met, and I didn't hear the story, and they're still agile in whatever way, and some of them are doing it much longer than I am. And I was like, how could I not have met you or heard about you? Well,
Yeah,
it's a big world, and we don't know everyone. So.
absolutely, absolutely.
So if Bevan, if people want to contact you, what would be a good way to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I guess they can reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Twitter.
I think
So
that's the
that's
LinkedIn
LinkedIn. Yeah, yeah.
thing.
One of the short-term
And
goals I've committed to is checking my LinkedIn messages more regularly. I've been slack on that in the past, so I would get that. My SLA is down a little bit to at least a day or two now. But at Twitter as well is a great place to get hold of me.
yeah. For me, it's always there's way too many ways how people can connect you, and the hard part is sometimes figuring out who connected you on what channel. So that sometimes is hard. But yeah, I
Mm.
I didn't feel that it was hard to connect you when I asked you for here and for the other ways of connecting, working for the original book, for example, who's agile in South Africa. I think that conversation went really smooth. Yeah, you helped out a lot on restarting that book. I would put it like that, and that was fun working together. So this is why I also thought when I'm working on a video edition, I definitely wanted to have you here, and it was as fun as I was hoping for. So thank you
Awesome.
very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's I've learned a lot from you. There's lots of things that are well, we talked about transparency and you talked about different kind of things, and it all feels linked in multiple ways, which is not surprising. I think that's true for many agilists, but it's always nice to see that indeed when we talk that it actually feels the way I was hoping it would feel. So thank you very much for.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Bye
Cheers.
bye.
Thank you for
Bye.
watching Who's Agile, where the stories of Agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other Agilists.